Let's dive right into this explainer where we're going to unpack the incredibly rich, holistic traditions of Eastern philosophy. And look, far from being just ancient, dusty history, we're going to see how these profound ways of thinking can absolutely transform our modern lives. Whether you're dealing with burnout, trying to build better relationships, or honestly, just looking for a totally fresh perspective on reality, the insights we're covering today are going to be incredibly relevant for you.
We've got a fantastic roadmap for today. We'll kick things off by defining Eastern philosophy, then we'll compare the East versus the West, trace the Indian roots, explore Chinese thought, and finally wrap up with exactly why all of this matters today.
All right, let's jump right into section 1, defining Eastern philosophy. When we use a phrase like Eastern philosophy, it's crucial to understand we're using a massive umbrella term. We're talking about highly sophisticated, deeply diverse traditions that developed over thousands of years across India, China, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. And unlike some Western traditions that love to abstract concepts away from the physical world, these Asian philosophies are typically rooted right in the tangible, natural cycles of existence. We're talking about profound ideas drawn directly from observing the turning of the seasons, the flowing behavior of water, and that undeniable interconnectedness of literally all living things.
Now here's a pretty wild intellectual plot twist. The British philosopher Victoria S. Harrison points out that the very idea of a single, unified Eastern philosophy is actually a 19th century Western construct. Historically, there was no single centralized root of thought in Asia. Instead, what you had was a vibrant, beautifully chaotic tapestry of vastly independent traditions. And over centuries, these different schools of thought bumped into each other, passionately debated, and cross-pollinated along ancient trade routes like the Silk Road.
That brings us to section 2, the East versus the West.
So, how do these cultures fundamentally differ in how they approach the world? Well, the Western lens, which is heavily influenced by concepts like Cartesian dualism, often slices the mind and the body into completely distinct entities. It traditionally leans hard into rigorous empirical analysis, the triumph of the autonomous individual, and strict rules-based ethics. Think of Immanuel Kant's frameworks, right, where your actions are judged by universal, rigid rules. The East, on the other hand, takes a much more holistic approach. It leans into intuitive insights and views the self not as some isolated island, but as something fundamentally interwoven with others, with society, and with the entire universe. In a lot of these traditions, your inner peace is a direct result of how well you fulfill your role within that complex web of relationships. But hey, before we start assuming these two hemispheres of thought are entirely alien to one another, consider this. Despite those very different lenses, both traditions fundamentally strive for the exact same human goals. Whether you're hanging out with Aristotle in ancient Greece or Confucius in ancient China, both traditions are trying to help us gain deep insight into ultimate reality. They both want to help us forge unshakable personal character. And they both aim to help us connect meaningfully with the people around us. They are just taking different paths up the exact same mountain.
Let's dig into where so much of this started. In Section 3, Indian roots, specifically Hinduism and Buddhism.
You can really think of ancient India as this massive engine of thought for all of Asia. Starting way back around 1500 BCE, you have early Hindu texts like the Vedas and the incredibly mystical Upanishads. These early thinkers were deep diving into the absolute essence of reality, exploring huge concepts like universal consciousness and the inner self. Then, between the 6th and 4th centuries BCE, Gautama Buddha arrives and completely disrupts the status quo. From there, his teachings branch out, travel seamlessly along those trade routes we talked about, and eventually evolve into entirely distinct new forms, like Zen Buddhism in Japan. What's fascinating about the Buddha is that his main concern was overwhelmingly soteriological. That's just a fancy word meaning he was focused on salvation, or more accurately, freedom. Specifically, freedom from dukkha, which translates to unease, dissatisfaction, or suffering. This hyper-practical focus on alleviating human misery is the bedrock of the Four Noble Truths, which basically diagnose why we suffer and prescribe a clear, actionable path to end it. So when you hear about concepts like anatta, the idea that we don't actually have a fixed permanent self, and anicca, the absolute impermanence of all things, you start to realize these thinkers weren't just sitting around pondering abstract metaphysics for the fun of it. They wanted to provide a functional, everyday cure for the human condition.
Which perfectly sets up Section 4, Chinese thought, focusing on order and nature.
Picture ancient China between the 6th and 3rd centuries BCE. It's a time of absolute chaos, warring states, everyone fighting for control, and out of that chaos explodes this incredibly vibrant intellectual period known as the 100 Schools of Thought. Everyone was trying to figure out how to restore peace, and the debates were intense. On one end, you had legalism, arguing for raw, realpolitik and harsh autocratic control, basically assuming human nature was inherently selfish. On the other end, you had Moism, focusing on universal love and strict logic. But the two absolute heavyweights that emerged to profoundly shape East Asia were Confucianism, looking to social morality, and Taoism, looking to nature.
These two could not be more different in their approach. Confucius wants to build society through structured effort. He is all about lifelong learning, strict social rituals, and knowing exactly what your role is. He believed that if everyone just played their part perfectly, the ruler, the parent, the child, society would run like a well-oiled machine. Taoism, founded by Lao Tzu, goes in the exact opposite direction. Taoism looks at all that excessive social structure and says, no thanks, that's artificial and restrictive. It champions natural spontaneity, called zirun, and actually pushes the idea of unlearning all our rigid social conditioning. For Taoists, wild, untamed nature is the ultimate teacher, definitely not the rules of human civilization. Historians fiercely debate whether this actually happened, but there is this fantastic legend that Lao Tzu and Confucius actually met once. It is the perfect metaphor for the tension between the two schools. Imagine Confucius, completely obsessed with rituals and perfectly organizing society, meeting Lao Tzu, who just wants everyone to flow effortlessly like a river. Lao Tzu basically looks at Confucius and tells him to relax, drop the artificial constraints, and stop trying so incredibly hard to control life.
Yet, if you scratch just beneath the surface of all that bickering, you realize these opposing forces are ultimately chasing the exact same thing. Both view harmony as the ultimate endgame. Confucius wants social harmony to end the wars, while Lao Tzu wants cosmic harmony to align us with the universe. Both heavily emphasize humility as a foundational virtue, viewing arrogance as a massive character flaw. And most importantly, both insist that wisdom has to be a daily, lived practice. It is absolutely not just some theory you memorized from a book. It is something you have to embody every single day of your life.
Finally, let's bring it all home with Section 5, Why It Matters Today.
Here is the best part about all of this. You do not have to pick a side. You don't have to choose between being strictly Confucian or strictly Taoist. In fact, people in Chinese culture have been naturally blending these opposing systems for centuries. They use Confucian ethics, respect, duty, education, to crush it in their careers, build their communities, and navigate tricky social challenges. But then, when they go home and close the door, they turn to Taoist wisdom. They embrace simplicity, letting go, and effortless action to protect their mental health, find inner peace, and keep burnout at bay. It's a brilliant, holistic blend that provides a perfect yin and yang for navigating the modern world. So I'll leave you with this final provocative thought as we wrap up this explainer. Look at your own life in our incredibly fast-paced modern world. Where are you lacking balance right now? Do you need the grounding, community-building structure of Confucius to help organize your goals and relationships? Or is it finally time for you to embrace the unlearning, the letting go, and the natural flow of Lao Tzu? Take a moment to really think about that and see how you might apply just a little bit of this ancient wisdom to your life tomorrow.